Correct, to the cloud.
All right, hello, everybody. Good to see you all. I know it's a little chilly in here, just a little. So if you feel free to keep your jackets on if you like. I am sorry that I had to cancel last week's class. I went to Houston for the funeral of my childhood rabbi and best friend's dad. And it was very meaningful for me to be there, and so that's the reason I had to cancel. So what we're gonna do to stay on track for our class is we're gonna move through the syllabus as it's stated here, but just with the dates now kind of a week behind, or a week behind. So tonight's class will be the class that was scheduled for last week. Okay, so we're going to continue along that pattern, and on the syllabus it says that on December 9th there's a guest speaker for about anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. That's now going to be on December 16th. Okay, so everything is just following, having skipped 1 week, and we're adding one session to the end on December 23rd to give us the same number of sessions, and we're just going to stay on track. Okay, so all right, so we are continuing tonight in our unit on enlightenment and emancipation. So last time we learned about the French setting and in the Enlightenment and Revolutionary period. We read Voltaire. We read the discussion about Jewish emancipation in the Revolutionary Assembly, the French people, the French National Assembly, and we got into the early 19th century in the era of Napoleon, and you remember that Napoleon convened what they called an assembly of notables from the Jewish community of France. This is also referred to as the Napoleonic Sanhedrin, an assembly of Jewish leaders to whom were posed questions from Napoleon about Jewish practices and attitudes, and how they relate, how the Jews see themselves in relation to France and to the French people. Of course, the underlying assumption of that, which, you know, to Napoleon's credit, he wants to either verify or dispel. The underlying assumption is that the Jews constitute a nation within a nation. And there are questions of where do the Jews' loyalties lie? And in our new, in the new France, is it possible for Jews to be citizens of France like everyone else? Remember in the debate of the French National Assembly, the Count Clermont-Tonnerre advocated for citizenship for the Jews, what we call emancipation for the Jews, and he said to the Jews as individuals, everything must be granted. To the Jews as a collective or as a nation, nothing must be granted. Okay, the idea of liberty, fraternity, and equality that animated the French Revolution was that every individual was to be a full and equal citizen under the law, and no prejudices or privileges or disqualifications for any reason should be made from that principle on the basis of religion or other factors. Okay, so we get this idea of the Jews as individuals, this is Claremont Tonnerre, the Jews as individuals are entitled, just like everybody else, to citizenship, must be granted it. But the idea of a Jewish collective that somehow, that would somehow kind of be recognized as an entity within the French Republic is a no-go. Okay, and that's a marked change from what happened, from what came before, because up to the French Revolution, Jews were not citizens of the countries in which they lived. The Jews existed as a corporate entity, a community that dwelled in the country at the pleasure of the king and paid, taxes to the king as a community, but had jurisdiction in their own sphere to, conduct their communal affairs, to live by religious law, etc. But from the time of the French Revolution rejects that organization of society, wants to welcome Jews in as individuals, but nullify any a collective claim by the Jewish community to rights as an entity. Okay, so then when Napoleon comes along, he's establishing his French Empire, and Napoleon is of course he's an emperor, he's an authoritarian ruler, but he does see himself as a custodian of the principles of the French Revolution. And so he's asking these questions now to leaders of the Jewish community so that he can either confirm or dispel these suppositions about Jews that they see themselves as a nation within the nation. Because their answers to his questions will inform how Napoleon's empire will relate to Jews. So we looked at the questions last time. I want to start off tonight's class by looking at some of the answers. We're not going to look at the whole thing. It's very long. And we're going to move quickly through this so that we can get to Germany tonight. But I do want to read some stuff from the Assembly of Notables because it will help set the table for the discussions that we read in as our German thinkers for tonight. So let's see, Dory, can we, I don't remember, did I give you guys the copies of the?
No, I don't know.
I didn't, okay, that's fine, that's fine. We're going to, we're just looking at it on the screen and I'll read it aloud. Dory, can you scroll down? I want to, if you can find where it says fourth question. Okay. I think we're just gonna look at it on the screen. You don't have it in front of you. But let's look and see where it says, we can find where it says fourth question.
I think you passed it.
You passed it. Did you pass it? There it is, fourth question. Okay, so the fourth question, whoops. The fourth question was, in the eyes of Jews, are Frenchmen considered as their brethren, or are they considered as strangers? And the answer of the assembly is, in the eyes of Jews, Frenchmen are their brethren and are not strangers. The true spirit of the law of Moses is consonant with this mode of considering Frenchmen. When the Israelites formed a settled and independent nation, their law made it a rule for them to consider strangers as their brethren. With the most tender care for their welfare, their lawgiver commands to love them. Love ye therefore the strangers, says he to the Israelites, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Respect and benevolence towards strangers are enforced by Moses, not as an exhortation to the practice of social morality only, but as an obligation imposed by God himself. A religion whose fundamental maxims are such a religion which makes a duty of loving the stranger, which enforces the practice of social virtues, must surely require that its followers should consider their fellow citizens as brethren. And how could they consider them otherwise when they inhabit the same land, when they are ruled and protected by the same government and by the same laws, when they enjoy the same rights and have the same duties to fulfill? There exists, even between the Jew and Christian, a tie which abundantly compensates for religion. It is the tie of gratitude. This sentiment was at first excited in us by the mere grant of toleration. It has been increased these 18 years by new favors from government to such a degree of energy that now our fate is irrevocably linked with the common fate of all Frenchmen. Yes, France is our country. All Frenchmen are our brethren, and this glorious title, by raising us our own esteem, becomes a sure pledge that we shall never cease to be worthy of it. Okay. Let's look at the fifth question. In either case, what line of conduct does their law prescribe towards Frenchmen not of their religion? Answer. The line of conduct prescribed towards Frenchmen not of our religion is the same as that prescribed between Jews themselves. We admit of no difference but that of worshiping the Supreme Being, everyone in his own way. The answer to the preceding question has explained the line of conduct which the law of Moses and the Talmud prescribe towards Frenchmen not of our religion. At the present time, when Jews no longer form a separate people, but enjoy the advantage of being incorporated with the great nation, which privilege they consider as a kind of political redemption, it is impossible that a Jew should treat a Frenchman, not of his religion, in any other manner than he would treat one of his Israelite brethren. All right, so let's pause there and just reflect on the answers to these two questions. What do you see happening here? David.
Sanhedrin is responding as if the Jewish people are no longer a people, and they are now being defined as a separate religion.
Okay, good. Yes, this is a major development in European Jewry. Certainly one that not all Jews agree with, but this Sanhedrin declared it, where they say the Jews no longer form a separate people. Okay, we are a religion only. So we are Frenchmen who have the religion of Judaism, but we are not the Jewish people as it were. Now, this is in what, 1814, I think, something like that?
1806.
Oh, 1806, okay. So in the early part of the 19th century, now later on in the late 19th century, in the United States, there will be a declaration issued by rabbinic leaders of the nascent reform movement in America that will say the same thing. Okay? They say in the 1885 Declaration of Principles, we no longer consider ourselves a nation, but rather a religious community. Okay? Which is a very important and far from consensus statement about Jewish self-identity, but you see it here. Anything else that you notice about yeah, Michael?
Well, they're sort of saying their religion demands that they should become loyal French citizens.
Yeah.
That is the religion that demands that.
Right.
So they're not.
It's a religious obligation.
Right, they're not, none of the things, they point to none of the things that would make Jews a separate people.
Right.
Pointing to everything that would demand that they would become part of,
For sure. Now they downplay aspects of a Jewish law that do emphasize separateness. So one of the earlier questions, is it, does the Jewish law allow for Jewish men to marry a Christian women or vice versa? And they say, they take a very kind of narrow approach to it, which is to say that the only thing that the law prohibits about in the ways of marriage is that we are prohibited from marrying people from the 7 Canaanite nations, which is true in the Torah now, but the rabbinic law extrapolates that and applies it generally to non-Jews, but they take this stance like we're only prohibited from marrying the 7 Canaanite nations, and while you know our rabbis generally discourage this kind of interfaith marriage, it's not prohibited. That's the position that they take. Okay, here in something that we read, I know the thought slipped. I'll come back to it. Adam?
Despite this, the Jews and other groups of Jews themselves don't necessarily agree to this.
Right, that's right.
That basically the question is what percentage of Jews go along with this idea?
Well, I mean, so there's a whatever history of like the impact of this Napoleonic Sanhedrin, I don't know it enough to answer, but it is true that not all Jews see it this way. But for Napoleon's purposes, he says, and his representative said in the questions that the responses of the Assembly of Notables will count as like official declaration of the Jewish community in the eyes of Napoleon.
Whether the Jews accept it or not.
Yeah, he's looking to these guys and say like, you speak for Judaism. I don't know enough about who they are, what their bents are, or what happens in the aftermath. That would be a good line of inquiry, to research on your own. I think, Lori, you had your hand?
I thought they were very smart that they took some proof text. They did actual lines from the Torah.
Yeah.
To kind of build their case in
To
a more
demonstrate.
direct way.
Right, yeah. Frank?
Well, I think somewhere it said that 80% of the Jews of France lived in Alsace and Lorraine, who were either Yiddish or German speaking, and probably far from not only being assimilated, but wanting to assimilate. These people in the Assembly of Notables are of a totally different class, probably come from Paris,
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, so that's, I wonder if just, let me look here on the,
Lori knew how to choose.
yeah, so I don't know, that's a good question. And to research on your own. There was one more hand and then Evan, then we're gonna keep going.
So it sounds like there's no reason for anyone to be prejudiced against the Jews. Is there?
Well, for Napoleon anyway.
Yeah.
Because he's regarding this as official statements, and these are the kinds of answers that he's looking for, because they're saying, we see ourselves as Frenchmen, we're all in. That's what he needs to know. He, from the standpoint of an emperor, he just needs to know that there's not some kind of community within my empire that doesn't recognize the authority of my rule. Right? Okay, so let's go to the 6th question. Do Jews born in France and treated by the laws as French citizens consider France their country? Are they bound to defend it? Yes, to defend it. Are they bound to obey the laws and to conform to the dispositions of the civil code? Answer. Men who have adopted a country, who have resided in it these many generations, who even under the restraint of particular laws which abridged their civil rights, were so attached to it that they preferred being debarred from the advantages common to all other citizens rather than leave it, cannot but consider themselves as equally sacred and honorable, the bounden duty of defending their country. Jeremiah exhorts the Jews to consider Babylon as their country, although they were to remain in it only for 70 years. He exhorts them to till the ground, to build houses, to sow, and to plant. His recommendation was so much attended to that Ezra says that when Cyrus allowed them to return to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple, 42,360 only left Babylon, and that this number was mostly composed of the poor people, the wealthy having remained in that city. The love of the country is in the heart of Jews, a sentiment so natural, so powerful, and so consonant to their religious opinions, that a French Jew considers himself in England as among strangers, although he may be among Jews. And the case is the same with English Jews in France. To such a pitch is this sentiment carried among them, that during the last war, French Jews have been seen fighting desperately against other Jews, the subjects of countries then at war with France. Many of them are covered with honorable wounds, and others have obtained in the field of honor the noble rewards of bravery. Okay, so this is quite a profound statement. The idea that French Jews, when amongst Jews who live in England, consider themselves to be among strangers. That our country is France. The French people are our people. The English people are not our people, even the Jews among them. All we have in common is a religion. Now, all of this is important to, and it's an important background into our main subject for tonight, which is German thought on the issue of the topic of Jewish emancipation. So emancipation, the granting of citizenship to Jews, comes first in France. It doesn't happen in Germany until later. Emancipation really happens across Germany in 1871. That's the year when Jews are emancipated. And it happens that it comes under the rule of the Kaiser and Otto von Bismarck, with the unification of Germany into the Second Reich. Okay. But we're going to read texts from Germany, or the German states rather, because it wasn't unified yet. In the mid-19th century. Okay. Now, before we look at those texts, you might remember in the first session, I brought this statue. Okay, I'm bringing him back now. Because this guy is important to German anti-Semitism, specifically. And B, because I learned some new stuff about him today that I didn't know until preparing for the class. So let's see, I wonder if our friends, I don't know, online can see it well enough. Maybe I'm going to describe it. So this is a wood cutting of a Jewish figure. He's wearing a big caftan, coat. In one of his, in his right hand, he's holding a gold coin. In his left hand, he's holding a suitcase. He's got, a typical kind of hookish nose and a long beard, payas, and eyes that, when you look up close, have a bit of a hollow feel to them. The story behind, I bought this in Poland. And there were millions of these things in the souvenir shops in Poland. And as far as the shopkeepers are concerned, this is a good luck item. Okay. But I learned in my research for this session that this guy actually has a name. And this is an important figure from German anti-Semitic imagery and so forth. What's that?
Suarez?
Yes. Okay, yes. Oddly enough, his name is Ahasuerus. Okay, Yeah, now here, I'm gonna pass it around, you can take a look at him. Ahasuerus. Okay, so we know the name Ahasuerus from Purim, right? He's the king, Ahasuerus, the king in the book of Esther. But in the 17th century, and I wasn't able to find who came up with it, but I did find that in the early 17th century, some German writers came up with this name, Ahasuerus, to use to describe the a literary kind of a figure of what we know as the wandering Jew. And the idea of the wandering Jew. What's that? Oh, he's wandering over there. Well, when you hear the term wandering Jew, what does that mean? What image? What ideas does that evoke for you? Lynn?
I mean, not a Jew, but Cain.
Okay, Cain, we saw that, right, in the Christian literature, in the church fathers, where Augustine said that the Jews are like Cain. You know, the Cain and Abel story is a parable about Christians and Jews, and that, remember, Cain kills Abel just like the Jews killed Christ, say the Christians, and as a result, Cain in the Torah is condemned to wander the earth and to have to till the earth and all of that. So too, that's the fate of the Jews. So the image of the wandering Jew does date back to the church fathers, you know, in Christian anti-Semitism. What does it mean to say, though, that the Jew is a wandering figure? Phil?
Without country, without identification, was wandering.
Right, okay, so if you couldn't hear Phil, what he said is, that means that the Jew is without country, without a natural home, and he just wanders from place to place throughout the world. And that's exactly this image of this guy, Ahasuerus, that they call him, who's this prototype of a Jew who is rootless. He has no natural place in the world. He wanders. He lives here for a while, and then he moves, and not because he's nomadic, but because nobody really wants him. He has no authentic natural home to himself. Okay. Yes, Lee.
There is a plant called wandering Jew.
Is there really?
Yes, and you see it in a pot, but, it's stems, it's branches go in all directions, and it will cling and then move on to. grow
Okay.
on to the next thing.
Well, that's not a good name.
I do have another piece of information though.
Yeah,
There is an attempt to rename it because of its anti-Semitic connotation.
yeah, good, because that's a terrible name.
They're calling it Wandering Dude.
Oh, the wandering dude. Okay. All right.
There's also a beetle, rain beetle, that's called Ahasuerus.
Really? And he's named after this image of this Ahasuerus.
Rain beetle. And they're a small beetle that feeds on molds and fungi found on damp stored products like.
Okay, so that's also part of, I mean, I don't know if that's why it's called this, but that this idea is also part of the persona of Ahasuerus, which is because he is wandering, has no natural place in the world. He feeds on the life of the host nation. He's like a parasite, okay? He doesn't really belong anywhere. He attaches himself to something, to a country, to a culture, and just feeds on it. And depletes it and, you know, twists it.
All he cares about is gold.
And all he cares about is gold. Right, that's right.
Right.
All he cares about is gold. So this guy, the Ahasuerus figure that I'm passing around, contains all of this imagery in the figure. When I bought it, I just thought like, wow, that's like a stereotypical Jew, and it has some anti-Semitic tropes. It's actually even more than that. It is the German and then hence, you know, kind of European image of the Jew who's condemned to wander the earth and have no home and just to feed off others and live by gold. And you look at his eyes are very hollow. I mean, and we're gonna see in some of our readers the sense that the Jew is a hollow being. There's nothing of substance there. It's just he just exists by attaching himself to other things and draining its life force. Okay, which is important here in the German literature, and then of course, very prevalent themes in Nazi antisemitism. Yeah, Adam.
It's interesting that he's a good luck charm. You know,
Yeah.
that basically, I guess,
Yeah.
you should have money like he has money.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that was so weird in Poland. And of course, like in the area of Poland where I bought it, there are no Jews there. Like they don't know, you know, they don't know from Jews. They just know this image, and I guess I see it as a good luck charm. Just like maybe, you know, people in America might see some kind of, you know, like if you're a Seinfeld fan. Remember like the episode with the cigar Indian? You know, it's like, oh, that's cool, you know, it's like, it's weird, it's quirky, it's a cigar Indian, and I'm gonna bring it in and decorate my house with it. I mean, just with no sense of really like what it means or where it comes from. But yes, so I learned today that this guy is Ahasuerus, and I wanted to show you because we are going to see a reference to Ahasuerus in our reading tonight. Okay, all right. So we're gonna start here. And I'm gonna hand something out to you to help us because our first two readings are difficult to understand. And I think this chart is going to help us with it. I give full credit for this chart to ChatGPT. It's incredible what it can do. So there is we're reading an essay, excerpts from an essay by a guy named Bruno Bauer, and a response to Bauer by Karl Marx. And it's hard stuff, but this was a dialogue that Bauer and Marx had. So I put it in ChatGPT. It's like distill like the similarities and differences, you know, between Bauer and Marx, you know, in their right. And it created this amazing chart for me, curating scholarship on these essays and everything, identifying the scholars, right? It's really remarkable. I need to have a copy of this when it comes back around. So we're gonna use this as an aid to help us in understanding our reading. Thank you. Okay, so we're gonna start, Dory, if you wanna put up the text, Bruno Bauer, The Jewish Problem. Okay, it's in your binder. It's in the section on Enlightenment and Emancipation. And it's at the back. It's should be the last handout in that section. And the front page it says Bruno Bauer, The Jewish Problem. Okay. So Bauer here is he's a German philosopher who at one point in his life up to this time of 1843 was a Christian, may have even been a Christian priest or something, Christian pastor, but at some point in his intellectual journey kind of takes a turn and becomes anti-religion. Okay, so he is a philosopher of the left in Enlightenment, post-Enlightenment Germany. Both Bauer and Marx are philosophers of the political left. That's important because what we're going to see here in Bauer and Marx is fundamentally a political discussion. This is not about religious doctrine like the earlier readers that we have studied. This is about political philosophy. Okay, so we're reading Bauer and Marx first, philosophers of the left. Then we're going to get to Wagner, who is a man of the right. Okay, so let's see. We're gonna on the Bruno Bauer, the Jewish problem. I want to pick up. Let's see where I want to start. Let's start over on the right side of the first page. So Bauer, we're not going to read the whole thing just because it's long. Bauer is an opponent of Jewish emancipation. Now remember, he's a philosopher of the left. He is, and leftist philosophy in this age adopts the principles of enlightenment. Which we've learned from France, which we say, but yet he is against emancipation for the Jews. So let's see why, what he says. Okay, so over on the right column, the last full paragraph there, of the Jews, it will at least be admitted that they suffered for their law, for their way of life, and for their nationality, that they were martyred. They were thus themselves to blame for the oppression they suffered, because they provoked it by their adherence to their law, their language, to their whole way of life. A nothing cannot be oppressed. Wherever there is pressure, something must have caused it by its existence, by its nature. In history, nothing stands outside the law of causality, least of all the Jews. With a stubbornness which their advocates themselves praise and admire, they have clung to their nationality and resisted the movements and changes of history. The will of history is evolution, new forms, progress, change. The Jews want to stay forever what they are. Therefore, they fight against the first law of history. Does this not prove that by pressing against this mighty spring, they provoked counter-pressure? They were oppressed because they first pressed by placing themselves against the wheel of history. Okay? So you can see here how he's framing this, that the world is moving in a particular direction. We are now live in the age of enlightenment, and the age of reason. And these Jews are stubborn. Oh, what happened here? And we got like Trump over there. Okay. These Jews are stubborn and determined to hold to nationality and religious law. And they just want to stay who they are. Well, if that's what they want, then they're not on the train of history. And there's no place for them. Okay, this is what he's saying. Had the Jews been outside this action of the law of causality, had they been entirely passive, had they not from their side strained against the Christian world, there would not be any tie to connect them with history. They could never have entered into the new development of history and have influenced it. Then their cause would be quite lost. Therefore, give the Jews the honor that they were to blame for the oppression which they suffered, that the hardening of their character caused by this oppression was their own fault. Then you admit them to a place in a 2,000-year-old history, although a subordinate one. Then you make them members who are capable and finally have the duty to take part in history's progress. Instead of praising the tenacity of the Jewish national spirit and regarding it as an advantage, one should ask what its basis is and where it comes from. Its base is lack of ability to develop with history. It is the reason of the quite unhistorical character of that nation. And this again is due to its Oriental nature. Such stationary nations exist in the Orient because their human liberty and the possibility of progress are still limited. In the Orient and in India, we still find Parsis living in dispersion and worshiping the holy fire of Ormuzd. The hostility of the Christian world towards the Jews is therefore quite understandable and is caused by these circumstances. Neither of the two parties can acknowledge the other and allow it to remain in existence. The existence of the one excludes the existence of the other. Each one believes itself to be the representative of absolute truth. It would mean denying that it is the truth if it were to acknowledge the other. Now, this idea, we saw a little bit in Prager and Telushkin's introduction to anti-Semitism, where they talk about like what is the reason for anti-Semitism. In their estimation, the reason is Judaism itself, because Judaism is a monotheistic religion and claims that there is no God but the one, that is a claim to an absolute truth, and that other nations and religions and so forth have no place in the Jewish schema. So it's mutually exclusive. Remember, the pagan critique against Jews was that they wouldn't join the pantheon. The pagans said, like, fine, you live in our empire, we'll just add the Jewish God to our pantheon of gods, and the Jews would not abide it because there's only one God. And to admit of anything else is to engage in idolatry. Okay, so here you see this in Bauer a little bit. I think what Telushkin and Prager were saying. Andy?
Bauer takes half of the picture because he says it's just the Jews. Well, if you go through history, and I can't go far back, but almost everywhere, including Asia and India and Europe and the Western Hemisphere, there is always somebody else.
Yeah.
I mean, some places, yes, are more similar than others. But if you take it to this day, I mean, whether you're talking about the Uyghurs in China, whether you're talking about what happened in Burma, whether you're talking about what happens here in the US with immigration, and I mean, it's everywhere.
For sure.
But he sees half the view. It's just the Jews.
Right, now he said he's speaking about the Christians too, though, because he says that the existence of the one excludes the existence of the other. Both Judaism and Christianity are claims to absolute truth. So he's seeing that in Christianity also, but what he's seeing as different about Jews is that the Jews are not willing to get on the train of universalism and reason and all of this. They want to stick to how it always was, where his characterization of Christians seems to be, as he goes on, that the Christians are moving along with this, along with this history. Okay, now Marx is going to take issue with that, but this is Bauer's take on it. Okay, Adam and then Martha.
This is also the opposite of what Napoleon is saying. Napoleon is saying the Jews should be like us because their religion says we have to be like.
Well, Napoleon didn't say that. The notables said it.
Nobles said
Yeah.
that basically their religion says they have to be like us.
Right.
And this one says their religion says they don't have to be like us.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So whereas the Jews in France did say our religion commands us to be part of the citizenry and treat everyone like brethren and see ourselves as the citizen, Bauer is saying that Jewish religion is different than that, is the opposite of that. Martha?
Isn't that also saying that Christianity has to go also?
He is not.
He's not?
Well,
Because that's what I was thinking.
He-
The Christians will get on the train.
The Christians will get on the train.
So they'll lose their faith,
No,
no?
no, not quite. Let's keep reading. I don't
Okay.
think so. Now that's Marx. Marx will say it,
Oh,
okay?
okay,
But,
okay.
but I don't believe that. Let's read it, but let's keep going. All right, so he says, Jews and Christians can consider each other and treat each other as men only when they have given up the special nature which separates them and enjoins them to eternal segregation. When they acknowledge the common nature of man and consider humanity as their true nature. The idea of human rights was discovered for the Christian world in the last century only. It is not innate in man. It has rather been won in battle against historical traditions which determine the education of men until now. So human rights are not a gift of nature or of history, but a prize which was won in the fight against the accident of birth and against privilege, which came down through history from generation to generation. Human rights are the result of education, and they can be possessed only by those who acquire and deserve them. So check the chart and see if, I don't remember now, if it says something about Christianity and Bauer and Christianity, but here he says Christianity gets it, right? This concept of universal rights and so forth for everybody, even like incompatibility with Christianity, but Judaism doesn't get it. Okay. Can the Jew really possess them as long as he lives as a Jew in perpetual segregation from others? As long as he therefore must declare that the others are not really his fellow men? As long as he is a Jew, his Jewishness must be stronger in him than his humanity and keep him apart from non-Jews. He declares by this segregation that this, his Jewishness, is his true highest nature, which has to have precedence over his humanity. I think this is the distinction that Bauer is making between Judaism and Christianity. That Christianity has come along on the train and understands that that there's a human essence to everybody, even while it claims a universal religious or an absolute religious truth. But Judaism, he's saying here, is not as evolved as Christianity, and still insists on the separation of Jews from everybody else. Again, an old trope from the pagan world. So, all right. In the same manner, the Christian, as a Christian, cannot grant human rights. What neither of the two parties possesses, it cannot give to or accept from the other. But surely, citizens' rights could be granted the Jews. They cannot be deprived of civil rights. The question is, rather, whether in a Christian state as such, there are such universal rights. And Germany is a Christian state in this time. It's not a secular state. Whether there are not, I'm sorry. The question is whether in a Christian state as such, there are such universal rights. Whether there are not exclusively special rights, that is a greater or smaller sum of privileges, which are a right for some and a non-right, but not as such a wrong for the other. For the other will have his own special privileges, unless one would want to assert that the sum of special rights is at the same time the sum of total wrongs, or that the lack of universal civil rights is the universal wrong. Do the Jews want to become citizens in the Christian state? Ask first whether this state knows citizens or only subjects, whether the Jewish quarter is a contradiction if the subjects are divided into special estates according to privilege, whether it would even be remarkable if the Jews were commanded to wear special attire or special badges, if even the estates, when formally represented, must wear different clothes. If the opposition is no longer religious, if it is scientific and has assumed the form of criticism, if the Jew shows the Christian that his religious view is only the historical product of certain factors, then a solution has been given, because now the opposition is really not even scientific anymore. As soon, namely, as the Jew directs scientific and not merely crude religious criticism against Christianity, he must have looked critically at Judaism at the same time, because he must conceive of Christianity as a necessary product of Judaism. As soon, however, as both parties direct scientific criticism against each other, therefore also each against itself, there will be no religious hostility anymore. And scientific differences of opinion are solved by science itself. Okay, not sure that this is a lot of blah, 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 but anyway, you can see there his like emphasis on science and reason and so forth as opposed to religious dogma.
So would Marx.
So hold on, let's, I'm gonna keep reading and we'll take some notes. This is the solution of the contrast, that it dissolves into nothing. The Jews cease to be Jews without the necessity of becoming Christians, or rather, they must cease being Jews and must not become Christians. All right. The Jew wants to see his religion preserved. It is his real nature, his totality. He wants to make the acknowledgement of human rights dependent upon the acknowledgement and preservation of his religion. The Christian state, therefore, is only doing what he himself wishes. It acts according to his words. It declares religion as the foundation and essential characteristic of the state. Only this religion is Christianity, the successor of Judaism. Let's keep going. Skip down. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, scroll, move down to the bottom of 323 in the right column, the second to last paragraph. The emancipation of the Jews in a thoroughgoing, successful, safe manner will only be possible when they are emancipated not as Jews, that is, as forever alien to the Christians, but as human beings who are no longer separated from their fellow men by barriers which they wrongly consider to be all important. Therefore, the emancipation can also not be made dependent upon their conversion to Christianity, for by this, they would only exchange one privilege against another. Okay, would remain, there, go to the next page. Okay. Okay, the last paragraph on the left column. The problem of emancipation is a general problem. It is the problem of our age. Not only the Jews, but we also want to be emancipated. Only because nobody was free, because privilege was the ruling power. The Jews could not have freedom either. We all were surrounded by barriers. The Jewish quarter is right next to the police supervised quarters where all of us are registered. Not the Jews only. We too are no longer content with the chimera. We want to be real nations. If the Jews want to become real, they cannot achieve it in their chimerical nationality, only in the real nations of our time living in history. Then they have to give up the chimerical prerogative which will always alienate them from the other nations in history. They have to sacrifice their disbelief in the other nations and their exclusive belief in their own nationality. Only then will they be able to participate sincerely in national and state affairs. We, however, have to give up our skepticism regarding the world and the rights of man, the exclusive belief in another, and our immaturity before we can think of becoming real nations, and within the life of the nation, real human beings. All right. Granted, that's a lot of words and they don't all make sense. But what are your reactions to Bauer? Arlene.
I know you said that it's a political thing, not a religious document, but it just seems that within all his babbling on here, he comes back to the same thing, that the Jews won't get on the train. And therefore they are to be excluded and they can't have privilege and they can't be emancipated. It seems like it's the same old story, just very, a lot of fancy words to get there. And that in the beginning, that it's our own fault that we lacking in our rights. We
Right.
brought this on ourselves.
Right.
That's a little new twist.
It's a new twist. Well, not really, because we saw it, and the condition of Jews in Christendom is determined by the fact that Jews killed Jesus and
Right.
took the guilt upon themselves, so they are guilty, for that, but, yeah, in this case, the bringing upon ourselves is what he sees as stubborn insistence on remaining separate and holding to our religion above all else. Where he says, for Jews, that's more important than anything. That's more important than humanity.
He says the majority do the same thing. The Christians do the
Yeah,
same thing.
yeah, but he says that, he seems to say that Christianity has the capacity to differentiate anyway, where Judaism doesn't. Remember, he said human rights were learned by Christianity only recently in the last century, and he's talking about a Christian state and whatnot. And it can't accommodate Jews who insist on preserving their own nationality and religion in the face of all that. Okay, Susan.
Every time I would read the expression on the train, my mind kept going back to words of Paul.
Uh-huh.
When he said that, the Jews are sticking to their laws and they won't accept or bend to, to the humanity of Christianity.
Yeah, good, yeah. The stubborn adherence to the laws, and there is in a sense, and it comes to fruition in Marx, the sense of Jews as alienated from reality. The Jews are alienated from that, like there's what Paul's thought, like there's a spiritual world out there. The Jews are just unwilling to see it or unable to see it because they cling to the earthly law. Right? Here, the Jews, he's describing like Jews are alienating themselves from emancipation because they refuse to let go of their totalitarian claims of religion and nationality. Okay, Len.
So just to sort of like build on that, so when he's talking about, sort of science supplanting all this stuff,
Yeah.
you can see that he's, a student of Hegel, right? Because he sees, the way Hegel did, that history is unfolding in a certain direction.
Mm-hmm.
And he sees Jews as standing athwart that, which is like, it's more than just emancipation in one little nation state. It's like standing athwart the will of the
Progress. Yeah,
and
nice.
And what's neat is that Marx will take it in a different direction, but also be a Hegelian.
Yeah.
So it's a big idea that can encompass such different points of view.
Yeah, and so that's what he says, like, this question of emancipation, like, is the question of our age. I guess it's like, are we going to allow backwards thinking people or whatever to stand in front of the train of progress, or are we not? I suppose. Yeah, thanks, Lynn, that's helpful. All right, I wanna, Susan, you haven't spoken yet, and then we're gonna read Marx.
Well, the last paragraph.
Yeah.
However.
Yeah.
That last paragraph.
Yeah.
Kind of, talk about Christians.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. In other words, we have to give up our skepticism, we have to give up this.
Yeah.
So I don't understand what he's expecting.
But he's not calling on Christians to give up Christianity. But he is calling on Jews to give up Judaism. Yeah. And he's, so.
Well, doesn't he believe that Christians should give up Christianity, but it's just not practical at the moment?
Maybe, I'm not sure. That's a good question. I don't know.
was,
Um,
he talks about.
Let me, here, I'm gonna pull up, I pull it, I had. Well, let's read Marx and then we'll look at the chart because I wanna get through this and get to Wagner. Okay, so Marx. So Marx is gonna, we'll jump in with Marx. Okay, on page 325, so the next page. The last paragraph on the left side. Or right above it. Right above it says, if Bauer asks the Jews, so Marx is responding to Bauer. If Bauer asks the Jews, have you, from your point of view, the right to demand political emancipation? Then we rejoin with the question, has the protagonist of political emancipation the right to demand that the Jew abolish Judaism? That men in general abolish religion? The political emancipation of the Jew, the Christian, the religious man in general is the emancipation of the state from Judaism, from Christianity, from religion in general. Okay, so up in the paragraph above, here's what he kind of identifies the problem of Bauer. He says, when Bauer says of the enemies of the emancipation of the Jews, their only mistake, he says, their only mistake was that they presumed the Christian state to be the only true state, and they did not subject it to the same criticism that they applied to Judaism. We hold that Bauer himself makes the mistake of subjecting only the Christian state to his criticism, not the state in itself. Okay, so now Marx is making a political critique of this of the state as having anything to do with religion. Bauer assumes it, that the state is Christian, and he's saying like Christianity has evolved enough to accommodate, you know, emancipation of non-Christians, but Christianity can't accommodate this Jewish people that claims that they're this own nation and they have absolute truth as against Christianity. Now Marx is saying, but you're focusing on the wrong thing. The problem here is that the state is Christian at all. The connection of state with religion. Okay, so he says, he goes on to say, that the emancipation that we should be focusing on is the emancipation of the state from religion. In its own manner, according to its nature, the state emancipates itself from religion by emancipating itself from the state religion. That means that the state as such does not profess a religion, but professes itself as a state. So this is what we know as separation of church and state, right? The political emancipation from religion is not the accomplished, unresisted emancipation from religion for the reason that the political emancipation is not the accomplished, unresisted manner of human emancipation. This is just, okay, what does that sentence mean? The limit of political emancipation is revealed by the fact that the state can free itself of an impediment without the individual becoming really free. That the state can be a free state without the citizens being free men. We have demonstrated how that political emancipation from religion allows religion to stand, although it tolerates no privileged religion. So that's essentially what we have, right? You can be any religion, but the state knows no, favored religion. The contradiction in which the adherent of a particular religion finds himself with his status as a citizen is only a part of the general contradiction between the political state and bourgeois society. The perfection of the Christian state is the state which proclaims itself a state and ignores the religion of its citizens. The emancipation of the state from religion is not the emancipation of the individual from religion. Therefore, we do not tell the Jews, as Bauer does, you cannot be emancipated politically without emancipating yourselves radically from Judaism. Right? So Bauer said, if you want to be a citizen, you have to give up Judaism. Because that's the only way you can participate in a Christian state, even if you're not a Christian. Marx is saying, no, it's all backwards. The remedy is not to force people to give up their religion. The remedy is to force the state to give up its religion. Therefore, on the contrary, we tell them, because it is possible to emancipate you politically without your giving up Judaism completely and absolutely, therefore, political emancipation itself is not human emancipation. If you Jews want to be emancipated politically, without emancipating yourselves as men, the incompleteness and contradiction is not only to you, it is in the nature and category of political emancipation. Here he's making a distinction between becoming citizens and becoming free people. So you can become a citizen, you can gain political emancipation and still hold on to Judaism, because the state, if it's emancipated from religion, will have no preference about religion. However, and this is what you probably know of Marx, he's saying, but as long as you believe in religion, you're not free. Okay? So the problem of the capability for emancipation of the Jews becomes, in our eyes, the question of which particular social element has to be abolished in order to abolish Judaism. For the capability of today's Jew to be emancipated is the relationship of Judaism to the emancipation of today's world. This relationship is the logical result of the special position of Judaism in our present world of slavery. Now is where it gets really ugly, okay? And then we're gonna look at the chart and see how some scholars read Marx, but on its face, really bad. So gird yourselves. Let us observe the real worldly Jew, not the Sabbath Jew as Bauer does, but the everyday Jew. Let us not look for the mystery of the Jew in his religion. Let us look for the mystery of the religion in the actual Jew. What is the worldly basis of Judaism? Practical necessity, selfishness. What is the worldly culture of the Jew? Commerce. What is his worldly God? Money. All right. The emancipation from commerce and from money, from the practical, real Judaism, would be the self-emancipation of our age. An organization of society which would make commerce impossible by abolishing its presuppositions would have made the existence of the Jew impossible. His religious consciousness would dissolve like a thin vapor in the real-life atmosphere of society. On the other hand, if the Jew does recognize this, his real nature as worthless, and works for its annihilation, then he is working for the emancipation of man and turns against the highest practical expression of human self-estrangement. So Marx is saying something here about that Judaism has a particular character to it that alienates the believer from his true self. And that's all bound up with his statement that the essence of Judaism is commerce and money and all of this kind of stuff, right? Which Marx and his economic theories, say that all of that money and such alienates the human being from their own labor, their true purpose, in the world. So people who believe in religion generally, but in Judaism specifically, live in this like diluted state, this alternate reality that's not actually real. Okay, wait, we're gonna keep going. We're gonna keep going. Okay, we recognize therefore in Judaism a generally present antisocial element, which has been raised to its present peak by historical development, in which the Jews eagerly assisted, and now it has of necessity to dissolve itself. In its final meaning, the emancipation of the Jews is the emancipation of humanity from Judaism. So Judaism now, some of the scholars of Marx, according to ChatGPT, right? Which I believe that is correct, say that Marx is using Jew and Judaism here as a symbol for capitalism.
Why not say capitalism?
That's the good question.
You know?
Why not say it? Now, so going back to this guy, Ahasuerus. Remember, this image, he comes into being in the 17th century. And according to what I read, German culture over time comes to relate to, quote, the Jew as like a mythical figure. A little bit like, remember the Gospel of John did, right? Remember when it's like John talks about the Jews. The Jews are the sons of the devil and all that. Like, it's a literary device. And what I read about Marx is that he's an heir to a German philosophical tradition which employs the Jew as a literary symbol of things, of bad things, you know, of otherness, of rootlessness, of obsession with money, of hollowness, of parasitic behavior. All of these things are, for Marx, a literary symbol so that he can take it and use that symbol to speak about capitalism, because that's how he thinks about capitalism. So there's a debate, according to, again, to ChatGPT, and it cites the scholars who think about whether Marx's writing here is truly anti-Jewish, or is it anti-capitalism using the Jew as the allegory. Okay, so now if you look, I just want to point to the end of this Marx article. And there's at footnote 2 on page 327. This explains a little bit of what I was saying. The German word Judentum, that's Judaism, had in the language of the time the secondary meaning of commerce. And in this and other passages, Marx exploits the two senses of the word. Okay, so I don't know what would be an analog in the English language or in American culture, where there's a word that has like this kind of equivocal meaning. But I guess with respect to Jews, we even find it in like, you know, crass kind of cultural statements like to Jew someone down, right? Like if you say he Jewed him down, okay, we know because we live in the cultural setting that we do, we know what that means, like, right? We know that it has something to do with bargaining over money and paying less, you know, getting a good deal, right? You just know it because of the cultural resonance that it has. And I think what that footnote is saying, that in German philosophy and culture at this time, to say like Judaism also evoked in the minds of people commerce, if they were kind of synonymous. Okay, so some scholars here that, you know, would say of Marx that said of Marx that when he speaks of Judaism, he's making the play on the word, and he's using Bauer's language against him. In other words, Bauer talked all about Jews and for Bauer, it really is about Jews. and that Marx is coming in and saying, you want to talk about Jews, let's talk about Jews in this other sense, okay? But in any case, it sounds really awful, right? And certainly propagates really bad stereotypes and slanders against Jews. Okay, so he goes on. The Jew has emancipated himself in a Jewish manner, not only by gaining financial power, but because through him and without him, money has become a world power, and the practical Jewish spirit has become the practical spirit of the Christian nations. The self-emancipation of the Jews has gone so far that the Christians have become Jews, right? So you see the usage of the term in that, I mean, to say if it's strictly like a religious thing, that statement would make no sense. The Christians have become Jews, but the Christians have taken on this whole, like, you know, cultural, economic, whatever attitude and way of being of Jews, as Ahasuerus symbolizes. Okay. Yes, the practical dominion of Judaism over the Christian world has reached its normal, unambiguous expression in North America. Judaism has survived alongside Christianity not only as religious criticism of Christianity, but just as much because the practical Jewish spirit has survived within the Christian society and even reached its highest development there. The Jew who stands out as a specific member in civil society is only the specific phenomenon of Judaism within civil society. Out of its own body, civil society creates continuously the Jew. And he goes, what was the real basis of the Jewish religion? Practical need, egotism. Jewish monotheism is therefore in reality the polytheism of the very needs, a polytheism which makes even the privy an object of divine ordinance. Practical need, egotism, is the principle of civil society and emerges in its pure form as soon as civil society has given birth to the political state. The God of practical need and egotism is money. Money is the jealous God of Israel, before whom no other God may endure. Money debases all gods of men and transforms them into commodities. Money is the common value of all things constituted for itself. So it robbed the whole universe, the world of men, of nature, of their specific values. Money is the essence of man's labor and existence, alienated from man. And this alien being rules him, and he adores it. The God of the Jews has become the God of the universe. The real God of the Jews is money. Their God is only an illusory bill of exchange. Now, whether he's using Jew as a literary device or whatever, the fact that he can do this, the fact that it would occur to him to do this, and the fact that the culture took on this resonance when it comes to the word Judentum and all of this, is clearly a product of what came before. Apropos Paul, that Susan brought up, this idea that Jews alienate themselves from the reality of Christ. It's right there before them. They won't see it. They're incapable of seeing it, and they cling to this fake stuff that they think is real. That's essentially what, Paul says it in a religious sense. Marx is saying it in an economic sense. And by this time, all of these tropes that have been built up from, earlier times have become the baggage that comes along with the concept of Judaism and the Jew. Right? Marx would not have written this had it not been for the pagans and for Paul and for the church fathers and all of that who developed it. Okay, let's see here. Look at the bottom of 326, the bottom on the right side, the last paragraph. Because in bourgeois society, the real nature of the Jew has found universal realization. Therefore, that society cannot convince the Jew of the non-reality of his religion, which is nothing other than the ideal concept of practical need. Not only in the Pentateuch or Talmud, but in our present society, we find the nature of the Jew, not in the abstract, but in a highly empirical being, not in the narrow-mindedness of the Jew, but in the Jewish narrow-mindedness of society. As soon as society will succeed in abolishing the empirical nature of Judaism, commerce and its presuppositions, the existence of the Jew will be impossible, because his consciousness will have lost its object. The subjective basis of Judaism, the practical need, will be humanized. The conflict of the individual material existence with the existence of humanity as a species will have ceased to exist. The social emancipation of the Jew is the emancipation of society from Judaism. That's pretty harsh stuff, right? And again, whatever, whether Marx is writing that to be literal in his assessment of Jews, or he's using Jews as literary devices in a highbrow philosophy, Marx is a very important thinker, and this is a very important work, and it puts out there all of this horrific stuff about Jews, which in turn influence the way later philosophers and non-philosophers think. Okay, Michael.
When I read this, first with ChatGPT says Marx changes this to dialectical materialism in his later works. He drops the Jewishness from the whole thing. So we have to liberate ourselves from capitalism.
Yeah.
But to me, it makes me think, Marx was not a very smart man. I mean, this makes no sense.
Okay, well, Marx is smart or not, he's a very influential philosopher in world history.
Economic.
Yeah, he's very important.
This gave you a whole new
Yeah, right?
outlook on Marx.
So if you look at the chart, and I don't want to go through, you can take it home and look at it, but you'll see that Marx is actually arguing for emancipation of the Jews, right? Whereas Bauer is arguing against it. Marx is for it, but he has a real nice way of making that case, right? Yeah, Lynn?
Okay, so, yes to everything, the rhetoric is horrible. But to be clear about what he's saying that this whole thing about, that the Jewish, when he's talking about the Jewish religion, he doesn't say a word about the Jewish religion. He keeps on saying it's about egotism and practicality.
Yeah.
Right? To Marx, that's the natural state, not the natural state, but that is the state of being alienated. Where you need to be practical, you need to be egotistical, you need to be trying to gain capital because you are in a rat race with everybody else around you. And you are alienated from your society and you're alienated from humanity as a whole.
Right.
So it seems to me like he's using that, the social emancipation of the Jew is the emancipation of society from Judaism, is a way of saying the emancipation of society from the state of alienation.
Right.
So in that sense, yeah, he mentions the Talmud and the Pentateuch, but at that point at least, and I have no doubt that he was anti-Semitic, which is a pity because his beard was perfectly rabbinical. But
He's Jewish.
His father was Jewish, but Marx was baptized as a
Both
kid.
parents were Jewish.
But he's saying that Jewishness is the state of alienation.
Yes, that's right, and that fits with Ahasuerus, this guy, who lives in a condition of eternal alienation. Right? So it's all bound up together. that like, that now by this point, and much earlier, but so much in German anti-Semitic literature, Jews are like these mythical creatures that represent all of this stuff, you know, and the eternal Jew, the wandering Jew, all of this it is symbolic of alienation.
But then he's blowing it up to say we're all Jews.
We have all become, even Christian societies become Jews, that's right. The whole thing, yeah, right, the whole thing. We've all kind of become this guy. And we need to find rootedness in something real instead of the wandering, clinging to the money, which is not real. Helen.
That was the opiate of the mass.
I would like to look at the other side of what Marx is saying, because I think it's very limited. And even though he's considered a world famous philosopher, he is not talking about the limitations of the Jewish people from historical point of view, and what, of course, they're in commerce, and of course, they're wandering because you know that they have no other options. But there's something about the theme that goes from the beginning of what we've been studying is the rejection by the majority. The Jews are, whatever place they're in, they're rejecting the main culture of the people. And that has to not sit well with the majority of the population.
Yeah.
And so it's not the Jews' fault at all.
It's not, but that's what Jews have become, you know, by the makings of others.
Because that's their point of view, and they're using flowery language, and this is a better presentation than some of the other people that we're talking. But it's essentially pegging them, the Jews, in the same place.
Yeah.
That they rejected whatever the main population is.
Yeah.
And they don't really understand the whole Jewish religion. So it's just more than a religion.
Yeah, okay, so.
Dr. Karen had her hand up.
Well, okay, hold on, I'm sorry, I wanna do, if you kind of indulge another maybe 10 minutes, I just wanna look at Wagner. And you'll have to read it, probably most of it on your own, but let's just turn to page 328. So what Ellen said is a good segue into Wagner, who, you know, the German composer. So at on page 328, the last paragraph there on the bottom, we're gonna read that. He says, the Jew, so this comes from a book written by Wagner called Jewry in Music. Okay, so here at the bottom of 328, the Jew, who as everyone knows has a God all to himself, in ordinary life strikes us primarily by his outward appearance, which, no matter to what European nationality we belong, has something disagreeably foreign to that nationality. Instinctively, we wish to have nothing in common with a man who looks like that. A man whose appearance we must hold unfitted for artistic treatment, not merely in this or that personality, but according to his kind in general. Neither can we hold him capable of any sort of artistic utterance of purely human essence. This must heretofore have passed as a misfortune for the Jew. In more recent times, however, we perceive that in the midst of this misfortune, he feels entirely well. After all his successes, he must deem his difference from us a pure distinction. Passing over the moral side, in the effect of this in itself unpleasant freak of nature, and coming to its bearings upon art, we here will merely observe that to us, this exterior can never be thinkable as a subject for the art of representment. If plastic art wants to present us with a Jew, it mostly takes its model from sheer fantasy, with a prudent ennobling or entire omission of just everything that characterizes for us in common life the Jew's appearance. But the Jew never wanders onto the theatrical stage. The exceptions are so rare and special that they only confirm the general rule. We can conceive no representation of an antique or modern state character by a Jew, be it as hero or lover, without feeling instinctively the incongruity of such a notion. This is of great weight. The Jew who is innately incapable of announcing himself to us artistically through either his outward appearance or his speech, and least of all through his singing, has nevertheless been able in the widest spread of modern art varieties, to wit in music, to reach the rulership of public taste. To explain to ourselves this phenomenon, let us first consider how it grew possible to the Jew to become a musician. From that turning point in our social evolution where money, with less and less disguise, was raised to the virtual patent of nobility, the Jews, to whom money-making without actual labor, that is usury, had been left to as their only trade, the Jews not merely could no longer be denied the diploma of a new society that needed naught but gold, but they brought it with them in their pockets. Move down a little bit towards the end of that paragraph. He stands, the Jew, he stands in correlation with none but those who need his money. And never yet has money thriven to the point of knitting a goodly bond twixt man and man. Alien and apathetic stands the educated Jew in midst of a society he does not understand, with whose tastes and aspirations he does not sympathize, whose history and evolution have always been indifferent to him. All right, what is he saying?
Only money matters. To the
Okay,
Jew.
only money matters to the Jew. It's like
The
Marx.
rest of culture doesn't really count.
Okay, why? Why doesn't it count? Because the Jew is entirely foreign wherever he resides, is entirely foreign, has no roots or attachment or investment in the culture of a nation. He doesn't understand it, he's indifferent to it, he's not a part of it. Now, Wagner's saying, and yet, Jews have somehow, like, taken over German art. Okay, and then he points to some key figures in his time, Felix Mendelssohn and Heinrich Heine and all the, these other, but he gives kind of explanations for each of them, but the idea that he says is that Jewish art is fake, because Jews can imitate, but they can't feel it. They have no visceral connection to it, because they're nothing but parasites on the culture. Okay, which is really obviously very gross. Okay, now if you just turn to
Dr. Karen has her hand up.
Karen, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Couple of thoughts. Aside from my intense distaste for Wagner, more than ever now. I'm just wondering, and maybe it's a psychologist in me, how did these men develop such antipathy, such virulent hatred, when all around them, I mean, you're talking about what, 1% of the population, maybe, the Jewish population in each of these empires, the wealth of the czars, the kings, the emperors, all the nobility. is glaring. You know,
Yeah.
Because
compared,
Yeah,
so,
it's, I
but,
mean, it's, look, this goes back to our first session, you know, where
right.
Sartre says, anti-Semitism is just a passion, a mental obsession of, you know, of people who need an object to hate. Let's look, we're gonna finish this up with.
I just had one other, couple of more.
Go ahead.
Wagner would have a hell of a lot of problems with Mendelssohn. Felix
He does,
Mendelssohn's
he talks
family,
about
they
it.
had to convert for him to succeed at all.
Yeah,
From
but he said what
Judaism.
Wagner says, that's right, and he does talk about Mendelssohn at the top of 330. What, he says that the conversion and sort of that some of these Jewish artists underwent did not wash away the grotesqueness of Judaism from them, which is a foreshadowing of Nazism, right? Because all to this point, in all of our anti-Semitic writers, we have seen that there's an escape for Jews. If they convert to Christianity, they convert to Islam, they convert to Enlightenment reason, they convert, you know, to Marxism, whatever it is. But here, Wagner says, there's no washing away of it, which will prefigure Hitler's anti-Semitism, which says there is no out. Okay, so Wagner says here in the last paragraph, okay, okay, so look at about 6 lines down. To become man at once with us, however, means firstly, for the Jew as much as ceasing to be Jew. And this had Byrne done. Yet Byrne, of all others, teaches us that this redemption cannot be reached in ease and cold, indifferent complacence, but costs. As cost it must for us, sweat, anguish, want, and all the dregs of suffering and sorrow. Without once looking back, take ye your part in this regenerative work of deliverance through self-annulment. Then are we one and undissevered. But be thinking that only one thing can redeem you from the burden of your curse, the redemption of Ahasuerus, going under. What does going under mean? I don't know, but I'm kind of thinking it's not good. And Wagner, of course, was Hitler's favorite composer, and he was a big fan of his political writings and whatnot. So this, and then what we'll study next week, the post-emancipation Germans, all will set the table for Nazism. Okay. So for next week, we're gonna get into the next unit, post-emancipation, and Judy will send out whoever signed up to read and present for next time. Thanks, everyone. It's just gonna get really worse from here. I'm sorry to say.